Again with everybody else, if we can take our seats. Thank you all very much for being here today and part of the Advanced Master Gardener training. I'm here to welcome Mr. David Roberts, who has been working with the environment, regulatory, land and use management, and watershed studies for over 30 years. Mr. David Roberts specializes in seeking innovative solutions to today's challenging community and environmental resources. He has worked in a wide range of settings and a variety of projects here in the Northwest. Some of his specialties include stormwater compliance, site assessments, mitigation and restoration plans, shoreline management, watershed and conservation planning, water quality studies, environmental education, and most of all, public involvement. He is a graduate of University of Washington and Washington State University, and has been a world traveler, including some of the Scandinavian countries and Australia. Please give me a warm welcome for Mr. David Roberts.
Thank you. I appreciate the fact that you would rather come hear me than rats and bats, especially after lunch. So I'd like to share with you experience. I had a great opportunity to participate in the Lake Padden area. Does everybody know where Lake Padden is? Anybody local around here? I saw something from Island County earlier, so I thought maybe wouldn't know. But obviously, for those of you who do know, Lake Padden is quite a special place. It's an amazing little park in the south part of Bellingham. And I'm going to share basically a story of what a group of people did there to raise some awareness. And so, I'm just wander around with this. Do I need this? Can you hear me without it? Okay, it's right. Good. We won't mess with that. So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right now.
Okay. I'll speak up then. So, in this presentation, I'm just going to go over with you what we did to build a team of people to work on a project together. We'll go over the results of those studies. So this is going to be people, science, and then kind of experience learning type of a discussion. And this whole this is a great example, I believe, of where we took citizen activism, we applied some good science to it, and then we were able to actually affect policy in our community. And this oftentimes you have citizen activism trying to work on policy, but you don't have good science. And this is why we felt we had kind of a unique situation. And the story began in a couple of different places, one of which was my son, Brian, on the top picture there, needed to do a senior culminating project for his high school graduation. And, he came to me and said, Dad, what should I do? I'm like, well, what are other kids doing? To me, it was like a lot of the stuff they were doing was kind of flaky. And anybody could have done it, right? And so I said, well, what if you did a water quality sampling program on Lake Padden for 1 full year? He's like, ooh, well, that sounds like a lot of work. And it was. It was a tremendous amount of work for him. He had to be out there in some of the snottiest weather, like today, taking samples. He had to adhere to a schedule. He had to work with other people to get samples in on time and the right kind of things. He had to follow some protocols. So there were a lot of wonderful learnings for him. And he did that. So during the school year 2009-2010, he sampled every month, had all the samples analyzed by Western Washington University. He got the data, created a report with a little bit of help, and got to go and speak to the mayor about it specifically. So it was a great experience for him. And he was able to highlight some basic water quality conditions. We didn't say whether they were good or bad, but at least he could show what happened with the seasons. Not long after that, we started to hear rumblings in our area of sort of South Bellingham and the county down there, that there might be some changes in land use that were being considered by the county. We live just outside of the city in the South Hills neighborhood, and the county was looking at putting that into an urban growth area and trying to shuffle it off to the city. Well, there were a lot of issues around that. Primarily, if we do that, then isn't that going to cause the build out of that part of the county, which happens to be mostly within the Lake Padden watershed. So Betsy Gross, lady below here, many of you may know her. She's a longtime activist in this area, involved in Audubon and a variety of other environmental causes. She said, gee, I'm kind of worried about where that's going. And she and I sat down together and she said, what if we did something to try and raise awareness about the lake? Because the potential of houses and development within the watershed might potentially impact the lake. And so we started to formulate a bunch of ideas about how we might work together. So we decided, look, let's tackle this thing and see if we can get some science help and we can get some help from some volunteers. So we had to go out and say, gee, we need some people to help us with this, because we don't want it just to be one or two people. We want this to be a community action kind of thing. So we all contacted a bunch of folks that we thought were interested in Lake Padden. We met down at the lake. We had some discussions about what kind of work needed to happen. These are all different things that we needed help to make this successful with. So we had to have people out on the ground, people in the lab. We had to be able to do some research on a variety of things. We needed to speak to policymakers. We needed a little bit of money to do the work that we needed to do. And so we got a bunch of that and we together, and then we basically went out and before we started, we needed to have a sponsor because we weren't a nonprofit. So we went to NC, the Nooksack Salmon Enhancement Association, and they offered to sponsor us and kind of handle our money for us, which was really important. We had some donations and things from various people, and we needed to have a way to shuffle that through and manage that money. So they helped us with that. We went to the university and we said, hey, would you be willing to support us with a student and some professorial oversight? And so the Huxley College helped us with that. We also went to the city and the county ahead of time and we said, look, we're going to do this study. We don't want anything to surprise you when we get done. So we're going to tell you about the study we're going to do, and we're going to take your input into that study, and then we'll design it so when we get done, everybody will know what we were going to get, right? And how we were going to get it.
Excuse me, what is Post Lab?
Post Point Lab, that's the, Post Point is the sewer treatment plant, and we'll get into the details of it later, but they provided lab services and assistance to us.
That's great spin. Don't call it sewage treatment, call it a lab.
Well, that just happens to be where the city's laboratory is in the sewer treatment plant. Yeah. Then we really needed a way to tell a story, so we set up a website and we put a place there where we could put our data, we could announce meetings that were happening, all that kind of stuff, and just get people generally excited about the work that we were doing. So, what happens here? All right. You're going to see what pops up. Looks like these pop up. So, we had basically some reasons for looking at Lake Padden in the first place. Those of us who walk it or run it regularly, observe it during all different seasons. And one of the things that immediately stood out for us, and any of you who walked it, particularly around the west end of the lake where the outlet is, and in the fall, we often get this fluorescent green algae bloom that comes in there. And it's kind of an unusual thing. I've been looking at lakes for 30 years, and I hardly ever see a lake that does that. But it is a characteristic of Lake Padden. It has a lot to do with nutrients and sunshine and wind direction and a bunch of things that, and time of year. But we do get that algal bloom. So we started thinking, well, what? That doesn't seem right, you know? So maybe that's a question we could look into. A number of us have seen, as the picture in the upper right, a rapid growth of aquatic plants in the lake, and some changes that are happening there too. So we're thinking, well, what might be going on with that? We also, some people said, well, gosh, I wonder if anybody's testing the lake for bacteria. We have a lot of people swimming in it. We have a dog park, which just happens to be upstream of the lake. And so we wondered, well, you know, I wonder how that's looking. We found out Department of Health doesn't sample swimming areas anymore in the county. They can't afford it. So we thought, well, maybe we could look into that. And then, you know, we decided, look, this might be a great opportunity for student involvement, young kids, college kids, that kind of thing. Why couldn't we bring them in to ensure that we get some good information? So this is a little difficult to read, I'm sorry about that, but beautiful picture just the same from one part of the lake. So what we wanted to know was, what's the condition of Lake Padden right now? What are the factors that contribute to that current condition? How would changes in the watershed, specifically development, affect the lake? And then what needs to be done now and into the future to protect the lake? So those were the 4 questions that we set out to answer. And we worked on this process from basically through summer of 2011 through about spring of 2013. So here's an air photo of the Lake Padden area, and it shows the sampling that we did. We'll go through each of these a little bit. Our main sampling sites were at the dock at the outlet and the fishing dock on the other end here. We also did fecal coliform at this site on the lake initially, and then up through the stream that comes in here later on. We did a couple of times, we sampled in that deep part of the lake right there to see what was happening during the middle of the summer. There's some stratification that happens in the lake, and we wanted to know about dissolved oxygen during the hottest part of the summer. And then there was some algae sampling that was done as well off of the swimming beach and then at our 2 other dock sampling sites. I'll go through each one of these projects, starting now with the lake sampling. We had, throughout the 2-year period we worked on this, we had 2 students. Andrew and Laura were great. They were out there like during the summertime it was every 2 weeks, during the wintertime it was every month, collecting samples and analyzing for all the nutrients and basic water quality parameters to indicate the health of the lake. They ran all the samples in the WSU lab, and then we paid the kids a stipend to do work. So many interns at Western don't get paid, and we try to make sure through our contributions we can pay the students for their work. And then Dr. Matthews oversaw the work that they were doing. And we won't have to get into all the details here, but I mentioned the sampling that was done, the profiles that we did, and the analysis work that was happened there. So now we'll switch to data for a little bit here. 2 main indicators out of this study were around phosphorus. In general, when you look at lakes, either from a eutrophication standpoint, that's how rich the lake is and how much it's growing algae. At anything over 20 micrograms of phosphorus tells you that things are getting pretty soupy out there. It's not bad, but it's sort of what the State Department of Ecology in their water quality standards calls an action level. So when you get over 20 micrograms, you should be looking at the watershed, you should be looking at the inputs of phosphorus that are coming into the lake. So we found in the summer sampling time period there in the fall, when you see those soupy green algal blooms, that's when there's a lot of phosphorus in the water column. And that's what we found later, is that during the windy time periods, it mixes the lake up, it brings a whole bunch of phosphorus out of the bottom of the lake, right when we have our beautiful autumn weather, and boom, it's ready to go for an algae bloom. So that's pretty typical, happens almost every year. We also used some more complex parameters that involve chlorophyll, and we found the same kind of thing. This is a trophic index on this side here, and you can see that during that autumn time period, the lake goes into a eutrophic kind of a state. So we look at this, we go, gosh, you know, we don't want to be pushing up in that direction, because that becomes less and less clean water quality. We want to try and keep it into what's called this mesotrophic condition as long as possible. The things that typically drive that up are sources of phosphorus outside of the basin, so outside of the lake itself. So it's runoff and stormwater and from the streams. So that was real quick summary of a lot of data, a lot of things we looked at in the lake in terms of what the college kids' work on water quality. We also had some questions, in part because of that green algae that we see there, about what the composition of that algae is, because certain types of blue-green algae can be toxic, especially to dogs and animals who might be drinking out of the lake. And so a sort of a sub-study of this thing, which was sponsored by the city of Bellingham, paid to have the algae sampled throughout the summer and into the fall, so that we could get an idea of what's going on. So there are lots of different algae in the lake. They come and go at different times, under different conditions of nutrients and sun and all sorts of things. The key to it is that a lot of them are blue-green algae. Some of those produce toxins. However, there was no indication of any significant toxicity in the lake, even though we had a lot of those there. So we were able to answer two questions there. Yes, the lake is moving kind of in an eutrophic condition, and one that is not necessarily desirable. It does generate algae blooms, but those algae blooms don't appear to be toxic. So there was two questions about the health of the lake. A third study that we did was didn't involve the college kids, but it did involve the Post Point Laboratory. This was a fecal coliform study. And, you know, fecal coliform is one of the bacteria that we worry about. It's an indicator that you might have other viruses and bacteria that are not good for our system out there. So it's just an indicator of things, usually animal, so it's going to be sourced wild animals or domestic animals or human inputs to streams. So we sampled, as I showed you in the map, 3 different sites around the lake, and we kept getting data that indicated one spot was different from the others. But basically, there were primarily 5 of us involved in the sampling process. Betsy and I, Phil, who's one of the board members for NC, helped out. We had Carl and Edwina. They were both had careers in bacteriology, so they were our technical advisors on our sampling. And then Peg Wendling over here is the supervisor of the city's laboratory, and she amazingly made the whole laboratory available to us, so we could bring our samples in. She taught us how to do all the testing that we needed to do. We ran it all. They did the quality assurance on it, and we got an amazing set of data out of that. Very cool. So we sampled, like I said, around the lake. We identified in there, right near the ballpark, that we got significantly higher fecal coliform readings than we got elsewhere. So we basically decided, hey, you know, we need to go upstream and see what's going on. But before we did, here's what the data looks like here. The red line, there's a red line here. This is the ballpark. The blue and the purple lines down here are the other lake sites. And you can see that the other two lake sites, the docks, there's hardly any fecal coliforms in our sample. But we kept getting these spikes certain times a year. These are in the fall, as you can imagine, with high rainfalls. That's washing off the soil and so forth down the creek right there. We got some blips a little bit later on in a big storm in the summertime here, and then the next fall it went right through the roof. So after that one, we decided we're going to go and look at the stream itself. And this won't show you the data, but we were able to go out on the ground. This blue right here is the stream coming through. Here's the bathrooms, the dog park, the ballpark right here. And we went upstream here, took samples, came down, and then we sampled all along this section here. And it turned out there were a couple of culverts that came from this side of the trail, this side of the trail over to the creek. And we found water sheeted off of this area into that a drain that ran right along here, and then hit those culverts and went right into the creek. So we had a combination of that. We had dogs that were clearly getting into the creek here, and we had people just not picking up the dog poop anywhere along this section of the trail. One day we had over 20 piles that were just draining into that ditch and then going into the creek. So we were able to collect this data and put it into a report.
There the dogs run free, you know.
The dogs run free here, and at the time, it was supposed to be from this point out was supposed to be the off-leash area. But many people just let their dogs out of the car right here. The first thing they do is poop right along the trail, and then they walk on because they're not on leash. They don't even see them.
I know, I'm there.
So that's the bulk of our water quality studies. But then remember we had a question, well, what's happening in the watershed itself, and what kinds of things do we need to prepare for in the future? So we had two phases of a watershed study. And the first of those, and the two people that worked on this was Chad Stellering, who was a geology major up at Western, and his supervisor is Tyson Waldo, who teaches geographic information system classes up at Western. And they were just great to work with. So our first part of this study was just to understand what is the setting that the lake watershed, the Lake Padden watershed has, and what are the characteristics of that. So we started out by just mapping some of the critical features. And so on this map, we determined that there's 1,789 acres in here. Of that, this whole chunk right here is the park itself. So that's 600 acres. And then we mapped wetlands and streams, steep and unstable slopes, and open space areas to get a general characteristic of what's going on. So these streams have buffers on them, just to give you a sense of what the area of potential protection is in there. Then the purple areas are wetlands. The purple stripe is a standard buffer that we put around there. The brown areas are the steep or unstable slopes within the area. So this gave us a general sense of what the overall picture of the watershed looks like from an ecological standpoint. Then Chad went through and digitized almost every inch of the 1,700 acres or whatever it was. Every house, he went around the roof of the house, he characterized the yard, the driveways, everything. It's a very detailed study. And then what was forest, he considered forest. What was wetland, he brought the wetlands map forward. And so we were then able to say, well, this watershed right now is 69% forested, and 21% of it is impervious surface. So roofs, I think we did roofs and driveways and streets and grass areas of lawns. We consider those to be impervious because most of the water in our grass areas goes off. It doesn't go underneath. Then we started to look at where are the people living and how many houses are there. You'll see where this is going in a moment. But within the watershed, then we had 930 homes, which results in about a half a home per acre if they were spread out over the whole area. And I'll point out, because these will be referenced later, these lines here were established by the city for managing runoff. So these are essentially like sub-watersheds within here that collect water to different places. And the city has to do that even though this is the boundary of the city right here. This is county, the city. All the water goes into the city's stormwater system, and they need to know how much water is going to be coming off of each one of those sub-watersheds, because usually there's a pipe that goes under a road, and they need to know how big that pipe is. So they had some wonderful maps that we were able to work with, and then put all the houses on there, show where people are living. So that gave us a whole set of statistics about the watershed. Then we used some mathematical models that looked at different types of land use and said, how much phosphorus, remember now phosphorus is going to be the key thing in runoff that affects our water quality, how much phosphorus is likely to be generated off of the watershed, and then you'll see in a moment how we drilled right down to each one of those sub-watersheds as well. So before there were any houses in this watershed, if we assumed that it was all forested as the forested parts are today, there would have been about 172 pounds of phosphorus would have gone into the lake. The current uses result in an estimated 491 pounds per year, and then if we allowed a certain amount of build-out, and we'll show you the build-out scenario in a moment, it would result in another 3% increase. And we use the phosphorus estimates that are being used for the protection of Lake Padden as the same thing for this area here, for the runoff rate.
That says at the bottom, bullet, 508 pounds per year additional. That doesn't mean
No,
we're getting the
and
491 to the 508.
That's right. It's an additional 3% increase. The bracket's in the wrong place.
Okay.
Good catch.
All right, this is
Thank you.
reading it first.
Thanks. So then we were able to go back and look at the watershed from the standpoint of each of these sub-watershed areas and predict for each one of them, based on largely the percentage of impervious surface, what the likely phosphorus generation is going to be in there. In this particular case, pounds per acre per year. So you can see here we have largely a natural watershed, and the pounds per acre per year is relatively small. My neighborhood right here, which is the most densely populated area, has a relatively high amount of phosphorus per acre per year coming from that, just because we have a lot of concentrated impervious surface. These areas over here are kind of an interesting situation. I colored them white because this water all drains down to a pipe that comes into the creek right here and then flows directly down the creek. It only goes into the lake when there's enormous storms and there's an overflow for it. So this whole part of the watershed actually isn't hardly even counted in the equation. And so that's pounds per acre per year. But if you look at the next picture, I have hidden it. Anyway, we also calculated the pounds per watershed. So, and I just left that picture out of here. And that tells a different story, because even though this pounds per acre per year is small here, it's a large area. So there's a lot of phosphorus comes from here, and then it's spread more evenly around the other ones, depending on a combination of area and amount of runoff. So as I mentioned to you before, the county was looking at changing the urban growth area status and trying to get the city to accept a portion of this area into the city. And the area that they were interested in is this one that's outlined here. It's in the county. It had been historically an urban growth area. And for reference, here's U Street coming up right here and back over the hill. And so we wanted to look at the concept that there were developers. They wanted to develop some land. And we wanted to say, well, where would it make the most sense to put houses? And where would it not make sense to put houses? So remember the first map showed us all those sensitive areas, the streams, the wetlands, the steep slopes, and so forth. If you think about that in here, these yellow areas are a combination of areas that are already developed, plus all those, what we call the sensitive areas. So we combine those areas together, and the remainder, when you pull those out, are the green areas. Those are the undeveloped areas, like that. So we decided to focus on this urban growth area and see, because the county was being pressured by developers to put this into the city and develop it out, we wanted to see just how much developable land was in there. So over the watershed as a whole, the green areas represent about 27%. So those areas that either are in park and sensitive areas are already developed. If the remainder of this watershed, 27%, could potentially be developed into neighborhoods, houses. So when we focused in on that urban growth area, you can see my neighborhood right here in the image underneath, and then you can see the area that is largely undeveloped in our area is this one right here, and this big swath here, which due to the amazing chuckanut geology in here is a whole series of folded landforms that basically are steep slopes, rocky top, wetland in the bottom, or streams, and then the same thing, just repeats itself. Very difficult ground to build a neighborhood or a house or anything on. And yet the developers who own and were expecting to develop that property just looked at it as if it was the desktop. They didn't think about the fact that they had all this complexity to the landscape or these sensitive systems. Well, if you look at the lake, which is down here, of course, this area is the single largest undeveloped area, and it happens to have the greatest amount of sensitive areas in it. And so our focus then became, okay, what do we do with that piece of property? What do we recommend for that? And as you can see here, there are places in the green here where people could do some form of development, but it's really pretty limited in there. And so what we basically did at that point was say, okay, we're going to go to our politicians and we're going to say, that area, if you want to develop it, the chances are there are going to be impacts to Lake Padden. And if you want to develop it, then it has to be developed in a way that stormwater will not impact the lake. So overall, our study conclusion said that lake water quality is relatively stable, it's moderately good, but it is impacted by current uses, some of which are things that you might not think about. Fishermen who come, and if you walk the lake, you see after fishing season, the shoreline is just beat to pieces, right? And so there's erosion happening along those shoreline areas. That's contributing as well as the watershed. The fact that the fishermen beat down the riparian area means we have more ducks and geese on the lake because they come up and feed on the grass. Where they should be out there feeding on the aquatic plants, now they're feeding on the grass. We have more ducks and geese probably than ever now. Phosphorus and fecal coliform are still the most important pollutants, particularly for fecal coliform over in the area of the ballpark. We have algae in the lake, but the toxic situation is good, and the current sources of phosphorus and fecal coliform can be reduced with better management. And then finally, future declines can be prevented by making sure that those ecologically sensitive areas are protected. So now, we'll step back from the results and we'll talk about the outcomes and accomplishments. This was an amazing time for all of us involved. We learned just a ton, not only about the lake and the sampling and analysis process and activism and so forth, but and reaching out to the community, but we also were successful in getting the county council to not move that UGA forward. They put it into a reserve status. It'll probably get looked at again in the future, but when the city ended up looking at those areas, they said there's not enough place to build new houses, to generate permit revenue to make it worth our while at this time. So they basically, the city sent a letter back and said, we don't want it. The county said, are you sure? But then when we went to them with all our data, they said, you know, it doesn't make sense to move that forward right now. So that was our single biggest success. We also went to the city and the county about what we thought were things that they should do to either do a better job of protecting or protecting the future, things that would cause decline in the lake. The one big thing that we saw out of that was that they did change the off-leash, the point at which you're supposed to have your dogs off-leash further up the line. I think that as upstream, I still see people doing what they've always done there, so I don't know that that's had a lot of impact. However, I know the dog community there is working harder on making sure that people don't leave bags of poop and everything around, because it's been much cleaner than it was before. The issue with the dog park and the runoff is still there, and we're thinking about going back and doing some more sampling now just to see if there's been any improvement in that at all. We had a 50-year party for the park. We partnered with the city and put on a nice party to celebrate the 50th anniversary and used that as a way to educate people about the issues around the lake. We had an opportunity to do a variety of different outreach things. We had kids doing tabling events down at the lake during several different activities. We got some good news coverage and have generally raised awareness about things. Our students had huge opportunities in terms of their internship to learn and practice and get that experience out on the ground. And our relationship both with the university and the city and the county was excellent. When we got through, they knew what the study was about. They paid for part of the study in the case of the city, and we got something that everybody could live with when we got done. Now, the lessons learned out of this was that if you don't have a spark plug, things stop working right away. And dear Betsy's husband has not been well, and she had to withdraw from our process. So as an ongoing effort, we are kind of sleepy right now. We're out there still, and in the right conditions, we might reactivate again, but that is hard. It's hard to sustain the interest of people over more than a couple of years on any effort anyway. We still have our website, we have our reports, an interest in what's going on, but it's hard to keep something like this going. We did reach a point where we answered the questions we wanted to answer, but we also know that there's a lot more questions, and in many ways, Lake Padden could be like a laboratory for the university, where we could, with the right funding, either through foundation or whatever, we could continue to do all sorts of studies around the lake that are socioeconomic. We could look at recreation issues, we could look at more water quality things, because basically we did modeling and we did a very small amount of sampling. We didn't look at the input from the streams or anything, so there's a whole bunch of water quality work that could still go on there. And then of course, you don't always get what you ask for. So we went to the city, we brought our results, talked to the Parks Department, the Public Works Department, we went to the county, same way, and they were like, okay, thanks. And didn't really take a lot of what we gave them. We were very specific, very thoughtful about not overreaching with our results. And so for some of us, that was a bit of a disappointment that after putting all this work in and everything. And a lot of it's who's managing those departments, and other parts it's just, well, this is just not something we can do right now. So, and there wasn't, afterwards, there wasn't all that great of communication back with us about why not. And that has been a little bit disappointing too. It's almost like, well, as the activist, you have to go in and kind of poke them in the side and say, hey, you know, we gave you that report over a year ago. What have you done with it? So those are basic lessons learned, and that's my story. We've got plenty of time for questions or whatever it is.
Two stories, especially triggered by this. Is the city ever expressed any concern about not testing for water quality, or many people in the community use that as their primary swimming facility?
It seems to be like hear no evil and see no evil. It's normally done by the county. The county is in charge of sampling. Used to be that they regularly sampled swimming areas. And that was one of the shocking things for us, was that we thought we were supplementing their studies, and when we come to find out they weren't doing anything at all. So, yeah, it's kind of weird to think about, isn't it? Yeah.
I can address that.
Sure.
I used to work for the county health department, did some work on water recreational illnesses, all the way from swimmer's itch, which is so awful.
Yes, I've
Just
had it.
swimmer's itch,
Actually,
all the way to salmonella, E. coli, norovirus, etc. And despite everything, we have relatively good swimming areas. So when you're faced between, the decisions you have to make between shaken baby syndrome and methamphetamines, you've got to make choices. That doesn't mean roll over and die. Express your concern and see what can be done by way of fundraising as well. But when it's difficult times, as we all know, something's got to give.
And there are no...
They want to test them, but you have to make a choice.
Yeah, that's difficult. Thanks for mentioning that.
Sure.
I appreciate that.
So I would also say that I think even though people swim there, I don't think they're considered today an official swimmer.
Right there where the dressing rooms are?
I'm sorry, what was his question?
There's no life, I mean,
There's no life.
I could be wrong, I'm just saying that they may be looking to absolve themselves of that being.
Well, they certainly took the lifeguards away a number of years
Right,
ago.
there's no lifeguard, there's no signage, there's no anything that says swim here,
Yeah.
it's safe, it's saying, because there's no lifeguard issues, et cetera, and staffing issues.
And actually, I'm more concerned about the people who are swimming up by the ballpark.
Oh,
And one of the things we urge them to do is say, okay, this is going to be a place for dogs, but it's not going to be a place we suggest that you swim. But they didn't want to tackle that stigma of saying, well, this is a no swimming spot. So,
Actually, it's far more complicated. You can't close areas because you lose recreational metering, and that is huge.
so then the question is, why don't we go and clean up the mess upstream? Yeah.
The other question that I had about water quality is that water goes directly down the bay. And water quality in the bay has been a concern of the state and people and everybody else. Did any of those folks express interest in learning what the water quality of the exit was?
We were coordinating with, it's almost like two different worlds, the people who studied the lake and the people who are interested in the stream, downstream. We tried to share with them our information so they're aware of what we did. I didn't necessarily get anything back from them other than here's what our study results were looking like. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering about if we can imagine if this would work there, if there could be a project set up to create a rain garden along the edge of the dog park, and all the dog owners working on it. And then I also wonder with this, you mentioned the source of phosphorus, And I'm wondering, if I could hear more about that, and then also whether the Department of the Ecology's rule changes that are coming up that are going to demand that stormwater be dealt with on site for future development, whether that figures into your talk about development.
Proactive, though. It's
Yeah,
just on
no,
there.
yeah, you can't,
No, I'm
can't
saying,
deal
but for
with the
looking at the
future
area,
development.
yeah, for the areas that might be developed in the future, I'm just curious whether you would see that as solving that problem, or or is that not going to be good enough?
Well, if they can eliminate the runoff, which is the source of the phosphorus, by putting it back into the ground, that's the optimal
Okay.
situation. The
That's what
question
we're
just
trying to
is, are the soils amenable to that, in that situation, that type of thing? And then your previous question
Well, we're
was,
talking about the source of the phosphorus and how you mentioned that could be dealt with. What are you thinking of that, and what is the source of the phosphorus?
most of it's coming off of our yards and streets. So really one of the things that we would want to emphasize in a targeted education program would be, wash your cars at the car wash, be careful about your fertilizer use, clean up your dog poop, those kind of things that are sort of the standard water quality message out there. My sense is we can still go a long way towards preventing those kinds of issues in the future and reducing that load to the lake, even though we've got all those impervious surfaces. We've asked, for instance, for more frequent street sweeping in our neighborhood just to make sure that we're cleaning up things. We have huge stormwater facilities that probably aren't quite doing the job, and there may be modifications that we can do to those as well. So you've got a prevention end, and then you've got a, from a new development standpoint, and then you've got things that we can do through education and retrofit and stuff still might be possible to do within the watershed itself. Yes,
Do you have neighborhood associations up in that area? Could
Yeah.
you handle the phosphorus, the car washing, the dog stuff through them?
Yeah, we could. I'm actually the president of mine. We're working on just trying to get our stormwater system so it operates properly right now. And, then,
Okay.
and we have handed out educational materials as well. So, matter of fact, we just put a Facebook site together, and we're reactivating our website, so we'll have places where people can get that kind of information.
Did you, by chance, you guys test for turbidity when you were working on everything?
Yes, the Western guys did that.
Do you guys see any correlation between the gravel pathway that goes around it and during heavy rainfalls having maybe a lower or higher turbidity?
I don't think they could get that specific because they only sampled at 2 places, so I don't know if we had any data on that.
Did you test for any toxins, or were you just doing phosphorus?
Only in the algae sampling was looking for specific kinds of toxins associated with algae. Yeah, this was just when we first started this project, there was a bunch of people, well, we want to know this, we want to know that, and so forth, and we sat down with Dr. Matthews, and she said, well, let me tell you how the world works. For one thing, you don't have an army big enough to do this, you don't have the money enough to do it, you have to have all this sophisticated equipment. So she helped us design sort of a very simple, it's more of a characterization with really a 1 year. We did actually about 1.5 years of sampling. You didn't see it all here, but one of the things we found was we saw those false spikes, and we said, we're going to extend that sampling period until Christmas or something so that we could see that twice. So there was actually 2 times we were able to catch that event in there to just verify that wasn't just a fluke of some kind of a weather condition or something like that, but it does actually happen. And what we didn't talk about here is that the lake does stratify during the summertime, and when you swim in the summer, it's pretty warm on the top, but actually down about 20 feet down or 30 feet down, somewhere around in there, the water below that in the lake is completely separated from the water on top, and down in there, the dissolved oxygen goes to 0. So it's always funny when I see people fishing in the middle of the summertime. It's like, well, it's so hot on top, and there's no oxygen in the bottom. There's only certain places where the fish can even be in the lake and survive. So essentially what happens is when that dissolved oxygen is real low in the summertime, then phosphorus is released into that water column in the bottom. Then when the fall winds come, it basically mixes the lake up. It brings all that phosphorus-rich water to the surface, whether it's that fall sunshine that we get in October usually. And that's when the blooms start, and then they last right through until early November. And usually when you see it green along the shoreline, that's just dead cells that, in plants that are blown up against the shoreline, and it's all over with at that point.
How deep is it?
Presumably, when you go from the swimming hole across to the rock, it's about 60 feet in, right just before you get to the rock. That's the deepest part. And then off the boat ramp, it's about 40 feet.
You answered part of my question with the dissolved oxygen, but has there been any platforms or presentations to how to fix the phosphorus when it changes? Because like filterizations, including different types of floating hemp or different types of swamp type plants that would take the phosphorus out during that transition before the fall winds come and change it, like they've done in some of the South King County ponds to help them restore state levels.
You know, we didn't really go that far, and part of the reason that we didn't is that the way we did our study, we can only look at the conditions in the lake. We didn't look at the net transport of phosphorus in other than to model that information. So it's just math, right? It's nothing that says about what it really does. For instance, we don't know what comes off the golf course. Although I did interview the golf course manager, and he said, you know, golf courses is a business. So we're not going to waste money on fertilizer if it isn't going to directly benefit us and get taken up by the plants, right? But a basic question would be, you know, could we just go and sample where Padden Creek comes in through the golf course and see what it looks like? So we don't know the inputs and the outputs, what that mass balance looks like, because you always have in and out, but you, in the case of lakes, you also have cycling. And it may be that the lake itself is cycling the phosphorus up, causing the blooms as much as the inputs and outputs are. So without more detailed study, which Dr. Matthews would happily help us with the right financial resources, you can't really necessarily say what the solution is. Because an internal cycling lake situation might be that you might treat it with something, right? Some kind of plant material or chemical treatment or something like that. When you've got an input and output kind of situation, then maybe you're looking more at source control. So without that kind of information, all we can do is say, this is what the lake looks like right now.
What tests does Dr. Matthews do on both?
They have a one-time-a-year kind of sampling program that they do, or maybe 2 times a year. They have reference data for us that we were able to look at from a number of years back, and they have a series of lakes that they sample, more for looking at the algae situation than looking at the chemistry, although they collect it all at the same time. But it's just kind of a shot spring and fall, I think, kind of a thing. And they have a whole collection of lakes in the north part of the state that they have been doing for quite a long time now. But it wasn't enough to really tell us the seasonal changes, and I only showed you a little bit of the data, but it's amazing how much that little lake changes from temperature and pH and phosphorus and nitrogen. And one of the fascinating things that Robin taught me, and I took linology and everything when I was in grad school, is that it's kind of a competition out there. Depending on the light and the temperature and the rainfall conditions and so forth, the plants, the fixed plants, may win out, and the algae will lose out. And so her theory is that we're just going through a time period where basically the aquatic plants that are fixed to the bottom are winning. And that's why if you go off the ballpark now, there's plants out for like 30 yards out into the lake, where if you went there 10 years ago, there was nothing on that side of the lake. So it's a variety of, the dynamics are huge, even in that little lake right there.
So, and you may have mentioned this because I walked in late, but the Master Gardeners for Whatcom partnered up last year with Ray Edwards and the Greenways program and created a handbook with photos about the native plants around the lake. So if you've gone around the lake on the main trail, you may see them. The Parks Department put up these nice little signs. So there's stations, is that right?
It's QR code.
Yeah. Oh, QR code, right.
QR code. It's also on the Lake Padden website. You can look at it there too. It's all electronic. There's nothing printed.
And we have a printed copy in our office. So Ken Salzman, who's a master gardener, a photographer, and a lake neighbor, is the one who headed up that project. So I only mention it because I think there's room for expansion, and it was great to partner with the city on that. And maybe that's kind of a conduit to, as a place to maybe host some more information or just make people more aware of the plants that are intact there. And I don't know if there's room for more planting along the lake shore, right?
I think the challenge on the lake shore is just the
There's no
need
reason
for
to plan
access.
to get people to trample it. That's just a waste of time and money.
We've looked at lots of different ideas of, basically community conversations that we can have around the lake. And one of the things that pops up is that if it wasn't for fishing season that we have on the lake and a first day, we wouldn't have the intensity of impact that we have there today. It's those first 3 days or so of fishing season that clobber that shoreline more than anything else, and then it tries to recover throughout the rest of the year. And so, one possibility was you say, well, we have asked Department of Fish and Wildlife to make it open for fishing all year round. And, somebody dumps in the fish once a year and nobody knows when it goes in, and you don't have that frenzy. But that would take away the cultural aspect of first day of fishing, right? So people would fight that, I'm quite sure. The other possibility is a little bit more expensive, but would be to put some fishing piers, additional fishing piers, or put them out farther into the lake. Put more of a T-shaped pier so it isn't just like one little place where 2 or 3 people can fish, but a place where we can, have people with wheelchairs and things be able to get out there. We've seen that at a number of different lakes where it's a great place. It becomes a family place to go and plenty of room for everybody, and that would take the pressure off the shoreline. But if you could get that shoreline restored, I'm sure that it would do 2 things. One would be reduce the erosion, and the second thing would be that it would keep the birds who are supposed to be diving and dabbling out in the lake, not feeding on the lawn.
Was anyone able to characterize Lake Padden as a typical health of a lake in similar settings, or better or worse than others?
I love that question. And that's exactly what we asked Dr. Matthews, and she said, well, just like every person is different, every lake is different. The dynamics of the watershed are different, the response to seasonal changes are different, and she said there is no typical out there. That she showed us things. She said, well, here's a lake, same size, same depth, completely different characteristics to it. Yeah, it's really not something that you can do. And I hadn't really come to appreciate that until I saw it, just how different this one is.
Yes. Do we have evaluation forms for this one?
Well, if there aren't any more questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.